Okay, awesome. Welcome, everybody, particularly for those who are attending for the first time and those who have attended our last 3 sessions. We are excited to see everybody and virtually. We are going to go ahead and have Ent Credit Union with us tonight. They are in partnership with us over the last 7 years. We are so very excited about that. My name is Pamela, and I represent the Area Agency on Aging, and we are under the auspices of the Pikes Peak Area Council Governments. With me, joining me this evening is Jessica McMullen, who is behind the scenes, making sure that everything is running smoothly on our webinar. So you probably are already familiar with the Area Agency on Aging, but very briefly, we are responsible for senior information, resources, assistance, public education for individuals 60 and over. We also house the SHIP office, which is the state health insurance program, where we deliver objective Medicare and health insurance information. So this season is a little bit different. We've expanded to the full state of Colorado, and we're very excited about that. And we have 5 sessions instead of 4, and we have two episodes. We have a spring episode and we have a fall episode. All of those are on our ppacg.org/events page where you can register. So what I would like to do is just mention briefly, make sure you keep your microphones on, that you disable your microphones. I will leave it up to Sara if she wants to take questions as we go through or at the end. And there will be a survey probably sent out tomorrow morning, and I will let our Ent representative talk to you about the survey and the special thing about the survey that we are doing this year. We are so pleased and honored to have Ent as our partner over these past 7 years. It was through their support and cooperation we would not have been able to offer these webinars. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bethany Windley, who is a business development specialist for Ent Credit Union, and she's going to tell you about the survey and a little bit about our partnership with the credit union. Bethany?
Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, Pamela. Good evening, and thank you all for being here today. Ent Credit Union is Colorado's largest credit union with over 400,000 members and 40 service centers up and down the Front Range. We have been serving the financial needs of Coloradans since 1957. And we believe strongly in financial wellness for our communities and are very proud to be in our 7th year partnering with the Pikes Peak Area Agency on Aging to help provide this information to you all tonight. And we do have a wonderful door prize for you this evening upon survey completion, and that is a $50 Amazon gift card. So make sure you take the survey to be entered in to win. And yes, thank you all again so much for your time this evening and for being here. And Pamela, I'll give it back to you to introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Bethany. Appreciate it. We are honored to have with us again this year the esteemed Dr. Sara Qualls. She is recognized nationally and particularly in Colorado Springs, where she's the professor of psychology at UCCS and the Kraemer Family Professor of Aging Studies, which, as you can see on your screen. She has developed the field of clinical gerontology and has published widely on many different topics to include mental health and aging and caregiver interventions. Under her leadership, she co-founded the training clinic and doctoral program in clinical psychology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sara Qualls. Sara?
Thank you. I really appreciate that. This is a wonderful series, and the closer I get to my own retirement, the more I deeply appreciate the fact that it's a really new season in life for many of us to think about. So it's pretty wonderful to have a financial institution helping us think about that. That makes a lot of sense to most people. The government helping us think about that in terms of Social Security and Medicare, programs that are for which age is an eligibility criterion in the US. And tonight, my topic's going to be really different. I'm going to be inviting you to think about how you want to live in retirement. And so I've set this up as kind of a workshop. There is a set of worksheets that are available in a Word document that you can get on the website or Pamela, have those been already distributed to people?
Right, those are on the website, right, Jessica? They're ready to be downloaded.
They are indeed. And if you give me half a second, I will put that link into the chat for everyone.
Oh, that'll be great. That'll be great.
You
And
may
Sarah
wanna-
has her PowerPoint that will be available as well at the end.
Yes, thank you. And you may want to pull up those worksheets because I'm going to invite you to do some reflection off of this, this discussion tonight. And you won't have time to reflect on all the pieces, but maybe you can get started with that reflection process and then pick the pieces that you want to spend some more time with as you proceed from here. So retirement planning, as I've said, is often centered around finances. And yet it is just as important to think about the people you live with, the people you want to spend time with, the things you want to do. All are elements of what I think of as the meaning and purpose that we can tackle in retirement. So the first thing I want to do is to point out that for many of us, retirement is kind of a long process.
Thank you for calling in. This is Jakara. How can I assist you?
Do we have a? Is it okay? Am I all right?
Make sure that all your microphones are muted, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry, Sarah.
No problem. I always assume I've done something silly.
You're fine.
Even after a year of Zooming, we often have glitches, don't we? So the first place I want to start is with the obvious point that for most of us coming into retirement, we actually have quite a number of years we can expect to live. Now, these are averages. So these are data from the Social Security Administration's periodic age tables. And these are data from 2018. So if you notice at age 0, males who are born in 2018 can expect to live 76.25 years and females 81 years. By age 60, those of us that turned 60 in 2018 can expect another 21.5 years. If you're male, or 24, almost 24.75 if you're female. So if you look at these numbers, there may be some people joining us tonight who are 75. If you make it to 75, life expectancy tables are that you've got another 11 years if you're a man and another 13 if you're a woman. And go on up to 100, even at 100, you can expect to live longer, just based on actuarial tables. Now, these are means. There's a lot of variability around those means. Obviously, if it's an average, then there are a number of people living less time than that and a number of people living more time than that. And at a kind of a gross level, you could look at the life length of life of your closest family members in the genetic lineage above you and beside you as a gross indicator of kind of what your genetic longevity might be, and take into account a lot of lifestyle factors, of course. So the point I'm wanting to make is not about the specific number, but about the fact that from retirement, many of us really are entering the last third of our life or the last fourth of our life. So as much time as we spent getting to 25, we may have ahead of us. If we think about all the development, all the opportunity, all the change that happened during that time. So this is a meaningful question. What are you going to do? What are you retiring for? So as it turns out, that aging does seem to be the only available way to live a long life. If you want to live a long time, you're going to do it in an aging process. That's going to shape what you can do, obviously, and perhaps how you get your meaning and purpose. So there are some key questions to think about as you look ahead to retirement. And we're going to walk through these a piece at a time. And as Pamela said, I share my PowerPoint at the end of this. So if you want to kind of review it rather than taking detailed notes, that's an option for you. So first, we're going to just think about, well, what are the components of our lives to think about as we think about retirement? And in particular, our identity. How do I think of myself? I've been a college professor since my late 20s. I'm finishing my 37th year at UCCS. That's a really long-term part of my identity. And it turns out it's also a deep part of my identity. So when I picture my own retirement from that particular job or that particular role, there's a lot tied up in that for me. Now, for some of you, your job is not in any way an important part of your identity. It's been a way of making a living that you will be actually quite happy to end and not lose anything in terms of your identity around the job. And there's anything in between. It may be that your identity is not tied up in the nature of the work or the nature of the job, but you may have some identity tied up in getting a regular paycheck or in being a worker or in having a structured day. So identity is a pretty big topic we're going to talk about. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what relationships we have and what we value and what we need, and how retirement offers us options to kind of rethink our whole relationship world. And then we're going to hone right in on what gives us meaning and purpose. For each of us, that's probably a bit different. There's not a right answer to that one. And it's worth reflecting on. I answer that question today differently than I would have 5 years ago. Not completely differently, but in some importantly nuanced ways. My meaning and purpose and my sense of meaning and purpose continue to evolve, and I suspect yours do too. And then we're going to talk about how we maintain our health, because obviously a really important part of anticipating retirement years is anticipating how we will experience our health and what health resources we have or don't have as we move into that phase of our life and as we think about what we want to do with this period of our life. So let's start with components. So I have some quotes that I've spiced through here that I think are all kind of interesting. Arthur E. Morgan, who was he was actually the first head of the Tennessee Valley Authority. He was an engineer. He did a bunch of things. He was a social catalyst, if you will. He said, preparation for old age should not begin later than one's teens. Well, if you haven't begun and you're later than your teens, you may be a little late. But his point is that a life which is empty of purpose until 65 will not suddenly become fulfilled at retirement. So if you've struggled with meaning and purpose, this is a moment to begin to do something perhaps different. And if you've struggled with meaning and purpose, this is a tough time to think about beginning. You may even want to get some help with that, or have some conversations with some people, informally or formally, about how do I figure out the meaning and purpose in my life. So if we think about all the different possible meanings and purposes in our lives, one of the key areas that we talk about is relationships. Just here's some images, all kinds of relationships that we may have in life. Some people really hone in on the arts and the meaning of art and the arts in some formal way: music, art, imagery, tactile, dance, all kinds of arts may be a part of the meaning and purpose in your life. Another whole component of life that brings great meaning to some people and not a lot of meaning to others is faith, and our faith community participation, or our personal sense of service and purpose and meaning. You can see the image here of Mother Teresa, who certainly, I think, has exemplified someone who chose to invest her whole life in a particular meaning and invested, I think most of us would agree, invested well in the deep poor. Health and health activity and health promotion, which some people experience as sport, and other people don't do it as sport at all. They do it as some sort of a more personal movement, from the chair exercise in the bottom left to a more rigorous swimming or workouts with weights. And certainly another component of our lives that we want to think about in retirement is our cognitive life. You can think of it as intellectual, you can think of it as cognitive, you can think of it as just what gives you stimulation that makes your mind work. It could be travel, it could be sports, it could be computer games, it can be a whole bunch of different things. But keeping cognitively active is an important component of our health, certainly, and can be an important component of our meaning and purpose in life. So I'm going to invite you to think about what's been important over time. And if you've pulled down the worksheets, here's your first kind of worksheet opportunity. If you haven't, here's what it looks like. The first worksheet is a simple, structured, retrospective review of the decades of your life in adulthood. So if you think back starting in your 20s, what were some key events that went on? And most importantly, in the second category, the third column, the riches. What gave my life meaning and purpose in my 20s? If you think back on those different components, or you just think about your own reflections, your own categories. So take a second to think about what gave your life meaning and richness across those decades up to now. I'm just going to pause for a second and give you some space to think about that. Perhaps you're noticing that certain relationships were more salient in one decade than another, or perhaps you were a competitive sports person in your 20s, or perhaps you were traveling the world in your 30s, or running a business, or you were locked in your house with small children without much opportunity to explore the community or the larger world in one decade versus another. Perhaps you went back to school in midlife, and that consumed some energy for you, or you maybe moved across country to take a new work opportunity or a new relationship. So I'm not going to give you time to fully flesh this out, but I am going to invite you to spend some time reflecting on the trajectory of meaning and richness in your life over time, and how it's changed and how it's been stable, and maybe what events were going on that either provoked that richness or that made it hard to sustain certain meaningful activity you were engaged in at a certain point in time. For most of us, middle adulthood is a time of great busyness. We have a lot of roles in middle adulthood. Young adulthood is the process of taking them on. We often choose a primary partner at some point, and we may have children at some point, or we may engage in a new, more demanding work life or start a business. And often by midlife, by our 40s, we're actually in the process of actually starting to reach out into the community. Perhaps we serve through our faith community, or maybe we serve in community organizations, or we're politically active, or maybe in our faith community, we take on more leadership. And if we've had children, we may have launched those children as we move into our 50s, or we may be in an active process of launching in our 50s and 60s. And things change, and maybe our primary relationship ended and we formed a new one, or we didn't form one. Our relationship with our friends may shift over time. So often people experience midlife as a time of great busyness when they are almost over prescribed in roles. We have a lot of roles, and we're seeking desperately some flexibility, some time away, some quiet, some discretionary time. And we may spend so much of midlife kind of yearning for that we can't imagine that we would ever not just look forward to it in retirement. And yet what I find, or what I hear actually through conversations with many people that I know, is that often when people actually get to retirement, now they're kind of confused about how to fill that space that they've yearned for and never had in the quantity that allowed them to prepare for what is now available in space within their lives. So if you want to think about in the second worksheet, which of those components are the most important in your life? Would you say it's relationships, faith, cognition, health, the arts, or some other component that is important to you? Because you need to really think about how retirement's going to shape those domains of your life. So take a moment just to think about that. Okay, so I want to invite you now to think about how those domains have varied in importance and satisfaction over time. So if you thought of it as a graph, you might say, well, my arts domain really took a nosedive in my early 20s, and then I've built more and more interest over time. Or you might pick a different domain and say, wow, my family relationships just dominated my life in my 20s. And then I went through some big changes in my 30s and 40s, and they were far less important. And then they came back with great importance. So you can think about, how those domains varied in actually their presence in your life, how important they were, how salient they were, how visible were they, how much did they run your life. I think you'll see that most of the really important domains in our life have some continuity over time, and yet there is quite a bit of variability in how different domains of our lives are powering us or are visible to us. So I want to spend a little bit of time thinking about relationships, because rarely do retirement seminars include a real conversation about relationships. So, you may have heard the sort of classic joke spoken from one spouse to another, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch. Well, that has a lot in it. Actually, like I said, many of us have been seeking discretionary time throughout middle adulthood when it was at a real minimum. And we get to retirement, and now suddenly we have a lot of time. And perhaps it is a neighbor who, now that you're retired, has decided that you have a lot of availability for them. Or perhaps it is your primary relationship, your spouse or your partner, where you've just looked forward to a lot of time together. And maybe during the pandemic, you've learned that there are also limits to that. Or perhaps you've learned that relationships can work best at certain doses. You need a certain amount of them, but not anymore. And again, this pandemic has been such an interesting opportunity for us to pay attention to how we relate to people and what it's been like to not be in the room with them or seeing them regularly. So again, coming back to this image I shared at the beginning, notice all the different kinds of relationships here, from partnerships and friendships and maybe people we play music with or play sports with or hang out with, or multiple generations in a family, for example. I want you to think about the relationships you value most. And I'm going to ask you to just sort of notice in this list what variety there is available to us among the people in our lives, from family, our nuclear family, the family that we consider our primary family, if it might be our family of creation, our partner or spouse with children, or it might be our siblings and parents that are part of our nuclear family that is available to us at this point. Some of us are embedded in extended families that are huge, others in extended families that are tiny. Some of our extended families are incredibly important to us, and some of them are pretty distant, and we just don't have a lot of connection. Some of those used to matter, but then life got busy and they don't. And one of the things we hear a lot is about how sibling relationships in retirement are often rekindled into a new form, and people connect more frequently or more intensively. I suspect some of you have experienced during the pandemic what I have, which is that when I couldn't travel to see family, I've created some regular visit times online. And so my siblings and our 97-year-old dad and his 91-year-old wife meet weekly online. Well, honestly, I'm more connected with my siblings through this structure than I have been in my entire life since I was a small child. So there's opportunities that in our culture that shift things, like the pandemic. There are opportunities that are created by the space of retirement, perhaps to travel and visit someone, or perhaps you're thrown together in caregiving for a parent and it's actually challenging. It's not all good. So more time with family isn't always a good thing. Sometimes it's a hard thing. But paying attention to who are the people in our lives is the task here. So family, close friends, neighbors, coworkers. Some of us have had coworkers that have been friends for decades. Others of us have coworkers that we have no friendship relationship with. And yet it's kind of pleasant. It's an acquaintance to see daily. And in retirement, we won't. It'll be a change. Memberships in various organizations, or we may have geographically distant friends. Some of you may have been in the military and you traveled around and you made deep friendships for short periods and you kept them. Others may not have people outside of this community that are close friends. And then certainly we all have acquaintances from going to the same grocery store or the same service agency, the same nail lady or hair person or whatever it is, the Ace Hardware person that helps you. Acquaintances that kind of make you feel like you belong. These are all kind of people in our lives. So I'm going to invite you to think about who's in your life that matters. Now, a colleague of mine, Tony Antonucci at the University of Michigan, many, many years ago, came up with the idea of a convoy. This was back in the 80s when the truckers were creating convoys. And you may remember, a trucker would be going down the highway and people would join that trucker and then people would spin off. And there was this long convoy and they communicated through their radios. And there was this concept that we sometimes gather people and we sometimes spin them off. So I want to invite you for a moment to think about who's in your convoy in adulthood. So Dr. Antonucci made the observation that she's now validated all over the world in every culture, is the concept that throughout adulthood, we tend to add people to our convoy. Occasionally we spin them off, but we do keep adding people to our convoy. And as we go through adulthood, sometimes those people come into the inner circle of our convoy. Sometimes they move back out or spin out of the convoy. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment here. I'm going to give you a couple minutes to either create on your own little sheet of paper or on this worksheet these circles, and put in the inner circle your closest people, whoever that is in your life. Who are your close people? And then who are your mid-range people? Who are your friends, the people that matter to you, or family that matter to you, but they're not your closest? And then in your outer circle, who's in that circle? So I'm going to be quiet here for a couple minutes and give you a little time to think about who's in your convoy. And then, of course, we're going to take a look at how retirement might shift that or change that. Now that you've begun to map your convoy and think about who's in your closest world, your middle world, and your outer world, I'll tell you that actually over the lifespan, the size of the convoy tends to grow in middle adulthood, and it shrinks a little bit in later adulthood, although not perhaps as much as you might think. What's interesting is that the inner circle stays of equal importance, and people gain the same amount of satisfaction from their social network in later life that they did in midlife, even if it's a bit smaller. So there's a model that says that basically with age, we get more picky and we get more selective. 6-year-olds really don't care who they play with on the playground, and 18-year-olds at college don't really care about who they go to the bar with or sit next to in class. They're open to almost anyone. But with growing maturity, most of us tend to get a little more particular. We want to spend time with people that make us feel good about ourselves and that reflect the us we want to be. And so with age, we tend to shrink our convoy. And then, of course, sometimes it's shrunken for us through death or disability as people become unavailable to us. But our social relationships continue to mean just as much across the lifespan, whether we're 95, 65, or 35. So who's in this convoy and who you want in this convoy is of particular importance to think about as you move into retirement or prepare to think about moving into retirement. All relationships aren't alike, obviously. We don't get the same thing from our pet that we do from our grandchildren or our children or our neighbor or our lifelong good buddies. So let's think a little bit about what we need from relationships. Well, we know that we need attachment. People don't do well when they don't feel like they've got a safe set of people to whom they're attached, when they feel really detached from important people. Now, there's not a right person to be attached to. It might be a partner, it might be a good friend, it might even be an organization, but you need to feel like you're attached. And it's one of the challenges, of course, in experiencing the death of a partner or a spouse or a sister or a parent. We also need confidants, it turns out. We need a person we can tell our deeper thoughts and tell it to them in a way that's not fully censored. So it turns out for most women, their confidants are a sister or a friend, another woman. And for most men, their confidants are a woman, a partner, or a close friend, a sister. So women in our culture, I think, have been trained to be good confidants in general. There are exceptions to every statement I make. And the literature would suggest that most people name a female as their confidant. We also need companionship. Now, you can move cross country with your best friend partner that you adore and feel completely fulfilled with around attachment and confidant, but you may still feel lonely if you don't have people to hang out with, to play with, to have shared experiences. Many of us love having a mentor, someone who helps us find our way. Certainly that's a characteristic often of career development in young adulthood. So maybe it's also a characteristic to pay attention to in retirement. Who are your retirement mentors? Who do you see doing it well when you look around? Who can kind of help you find your way in mentoring you into retirement? Sometimes we need people to receive services from us. We need to be able to give to others. And sometimes we need relationships in which we have a shared history. And of course, with very advanced old age, that is one of the profound losses. When we're 85, we're unlikely to have very many people with whom we have a long-term, or at least a lifelong shared history. I'm in the position where I have a shared history with siblings that covers over 70 years. That's amazing. And as my siblings die or become disabled at remembering our shared history, I won't have that. And there will be no one else who remembers me as a child. And there's loss in that. And there's opportunity before the loss to think about how we extract meaning around those shared relationships or from those shared relationships. So if we think about relationship riches, we could think about who makes us feel safe, who touches our heart, who gets us thinking, who gets you hungry for excitement, who pushes you outside your comfort zone or just jazzes you up to make you look forward to something, who gets you moving, who reaches out to you when you're in need. And these are probably very different people. There's probably not one person that does all of these things. And if there is, your network probably needs to grow a bit because you're pretty dependent on that one person. So relationship riches come in different forms and from different people often. So all different kinds of relationships are possible and they meet our needs in different ways. So if you go back to that circle you filled in, that set of circles, concentric circles, and you look at who's in the inner circle, the middle circle, and the outer circle, are there relationships you would like to strengthen? Maybe there are relationships you would like to omit. Maybe you need to prune some that have been not very fulfilling, or they bring more pain than good, and you need to set some boundaries. But at this moment, as you move into retirement, you actually have the possibility of more discretionary time to invest in relationships. You also have the possibility that shifting your roles as a worker may alter relationships. You may have less access to certain people than you do when you work on the same floor with them, for example. So it might be worth paying some attention to how you structure your relationships and how you have opportunities to grow them in unique ways. So I want to shift now and talk a little bit about what gives you a sense of meaning and purpose. And I should have said at the beginning, and Pamela invited me to do that, and I didn't think at that time. If you have questions or things you want to talk more about, if you could just jot them down, we'll pick that up and have plenty of time at the end to talk about them. And there's a chat function, and I have to warn Jessica and Pamela that my computer is not giving me my Zoom thing is not showing my chat function for whatever reason. I can't explain it. But if you have questions you put in the chat, I'm sure that Jessica or Pamela would be glad to share those with me.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about what gives you a sense of meaning and purpose. So Simone de Beauvoir talked about how retirement can be looked on either as a prolonged holiday or a rejection, a being thrown on to the scrap heap. I think there are people that look at it in a whole wide variety of ways. Some look at it as a brand new opportunity to expand and explore. And others really hone in on and pay attention to the fact that we don't have very many structured roles in retirement in the US. Retirement is a period where we have fewer and fewer roles that are formalized. And so people can end up feeling thrown away or rejected, pushed away. So I want to invite you to think about when you feel most like you. So this concept of meaning and purpose can be pretty esoteric, but let's make it more mundane. When do you feel like you? When am I most Sara? When are you most whoever you are? What are you doing? What's the context in which you feel most like you? That's really what we mean when we talk about meaning and purpose. Maya Angelou said that, a bird doesn't sing because it has an answer. It sings because it has a song. A bird feels most like itself, perhaps when it's singing or flying or nesting. So, is your meaning and purpose possible in a new activity? At the top is former President Bush, who took up painting in retirement and has become quite an accomplished painter. Or an old activity in a new way. Perhaps you've always been a teacher, or you've always been a mentor, and now you volunteer in a school because you can. So it's not like you have to add a whole bunch of new things or repurpose a whole bunch of old things. You get to pick how you think about this. So I always invite people to think a bit about giving, because I think for most of us, a part of our meaning is in giving to others. So if you look on the left side, the left circle here on the screen is your values. What are your core values? What do you care most about? And on the right circle are sources of joy. What lifts your spirit? What brings a smile or a song or a whistle? What brings you joy? And in the middle, the intersection of those could be some ways in which you can share that with others. The things that are most important to you and bring you joy. And if you could think about, what are the options for me? What are the possibilities for sharing that with others? I'm amazed at the almost infinite ways that people create and recreate themselves in retirement, often in ways they would literally never have thought of before. And sometimes in ways that are perfectly continuous with who they've always been. Perhaps the gardener who joins a community garden in retirement, something that was not possible when they had a full-time job and perhaps raising a family and a very overprescribed life. Others find great pleasure in volunteering at arts activities where they actually simply serve as the host and hostess that gives out programs at a play. Others volunteer in schools or with pets. I have a friend who had spent her whole career as a teacher, and upon retirement, fairly early actually, she dialed right into her passion, which is work with puppy mills. And she has spent 15 years now doing that work, not predicted by her role as a teacher, her job, her career, but now kind of a new thing in which she's able to repurpose her time for something that matters deeply to her and brings her joy. So asking questions, you can ask them in a bunch of ways, but sometimes people ask, what feeds your soul? What values keep you grounded? And it's equally important to ask, how much of yourself can you give? Sometimes people end up volunteering to help and find themselves engaged in way more hours than they had intended. I was talking to a friend recently who had happily taken on a volunteer role as sort of a surrogate grandparent for a young couple who didn't have family living nearby. And more opportunities to serve came along with some expectations that the person hadn't really intended. And so this person had to sort of think about, how do I set some boundaries? How do I figure out how much of myself I can give and it brings joy and not resentment? So those are important questions to ask also. I've certainly talked to people who were preparing to retire and had some fears about how family members were going to expect things of them. Child care, elder care, helping out in a business or an art gallery. It was more the expectation that bothered them than, it wasn't that they didn't want to give, but they felt that that expectation was going to come without the opportunity to negotiate it. And so that's important to think through as well. Churchill said, we make a living by what we get, but we make a life by what we give. And I have to say, I kind of agree with that. And that's one of my core values. It may not be one of yours. And I think that in retirement, most people benefit from having something that they do where they feel like they're giving. Mahatma Gandhi's comment, the best way you find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. So I think wherever you're at in your retirement planning or launching or settling process, standing still for a moment can be awfully important. Taking a little time for reflection about the riches that you have in your life and whether there are things you want to add to them. If you strip away work, what's still there on the landscape? And what are some gaps that work filled that you want to add? Now, I want to turn my attention to some reflection about health, because when we know that when we ask people about what's most important to them about their aging, they talk about primarily their health. Physical health and cognitive health are two critical factors. Actually, the picture can be thought of as a little broader than that. So typically in the health field, we talk about a wellness wheel or multiple dimensions of health. And those include vocational health or your work health, what you do, your social health, your spiritual health, your intellectual, emotional, and physical health. It turns out that if we don't take care of all those dimensions, we end up with a pretty lopsided wheel that can't roll. So if, for example, we don't take care of our social and spiritual health, but we put all of our energy into our intellectual, physical health, we may be pretty wobbly on one side of our wheel and not roll along so smoothly. So again, going back to think about health, there are a lot of dimensions. It's not just picking up weights or getting cardio. It does include those, and it includes a lot of other factors, social and cognitive and relational. Robert Frost points out in his saying that the afternoon knows what the morning never suspected. He's just saying with age, there are new possibilities that my children are in their 20s, and my children have no concept of richness and growth in the 60s. That's a meaningless phrase to them. It's not that they're snobby about it. They just can't imagine it. So now that I am in my 60s, I know a lot of things that I didn't suspect were important in my 20s. Yeats says it a little differently. One loses as one grows older something of the lightness of one's dreams. One begins to take up life with both hands and to care more for the fruit than the flower. And that's no great loss, perhaps. So if the 20s and teens were periods of dreaming and imagining all the possibilities that life could be, and they seemed limitless and unending, And then our midlife was, boy, we had taken up life with both hands and we were running it for all it was worth. Perhaps as we move into later life, we get the opportunity to rethink and rebalance what's possible now that we couldn't see, even in our 40s or perhaps our 50s. So we can think of retirement as marking the end of working for someone else and the beginning of living for ourselves, and including with that, giving, living for ourselves in a less structured way, less structured by work, but with all those dimensions of health and well-being being very relevant to us. Now, I've taken a lot of the ideas that I'm sharing with you today out of some work that was done by a couple of faculty in the business school at Stanford. Bill Burnett and Dale Evans have been doing this work for several years, almost 20 years now, where they started working with college freshmen around designing their life and trying to get them to think about living with more intentionality. And then they've applied it to retirement. They've applied it to a lot of things. And there are a bunch of books that come with that phrase, designing your life. There are workbooks. And if you like that kind of intentional reflective mode, you might want to look some of that up. And you might even find it meaningful to pick up the chance to watch some of their TED Talks on YouTube that are available for free. I have college freshmen also at UCCS listen to a couple of those, and their final exam in a class on professions is to think about some very different pathways they could take. Maybe 3 very different career tracks. The one they sort of are leaning toward or imagining or are committed to, and maybe a really different one, or maybe a wild third option that's just really, really different. I would invite you to consider doing the same thing with retirement. Maybe you've thought about retirement as, okay, I'm going to stay put. I'm going to stay in Colorado Springs in my same house. I'm going to basically stay put with more discretionary time to do more of the same things I've been doing. Or maybe you've thought of retirement as, I'm going to cash out and buy the sailboat and go around the world. Or maybe you've thought about it as, I think I would like to stay working and have a little more income than my Social Security is going to provide. And I'm going to work part-time, and then I want to do some other things with my other time. Or you may be looking at retirement and saying, due to some illnesses I actually have a lot less energy than I used to. So I'm going to have to really think about what's most important to me, because I don't have limitless energy or other resources, money, time, whatever it is. So my invitation to you is to think about doing some reflection, standing still for long enough to reflect on these different components of your life and to think about where you have invested, what the payoff for that was for you personally in meaning and joy, and where you think you might want to invest. And this concept of human design is just one that reminds us that as humans, we are in fact always designing a life. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm really interested in hearing what thoughts you've had and what questions you might have. And I'm going to quit sharing for the moment so we can kind of go to a bigger image. This is a pretty large group, but somebody might be really interested in asking a question in person. And so if you want to raise your hand, do you know how to raise your, oh, now I get the chat function. It was because I was sharing that I couldn't get this chat function. Okay, you can put a question in the chat. You can raise your hand. You can just turn on your microphone and speak out. I'm open to any of the above. What have you been thinking about as I've shared my thoughts?
I find it interesting, Sara, that we talk about meaning and purpose as we get older. I wonder how we can incorporate that throughout our life. I know you touched on that a little bit, but even when you're, when you're a young kid, everybody says, what are you going to do when you grow up? What are you going to do when you grow up? And then you get into your life and you get into all this, as you've talked about, busyness or academia in school. And somehow the focus, that's the focus. And everything is jumbled up and consumed in your life. And then as you get older, then things start to change. And it would really be interesting to see how we as a society could begin to incorporate that whole meaning and purpose throughout our lives, so that when we reach this stage, it's not like jumping off a bridge, or there's a bridge to cross, or jumping, you know what I'm saying? I just find that it would be interesting to see how we could embrace that better, so that we're not just we're not coming to this precipice and wondering, for some people, there may not be they may know right away what they want to do, but for others, particularly those of us who've worked most of our lives, how do we embrace that? Just throwing that out there.
Great point. And Bethany just put in the chat that she's been thinking about what she's doing now in her 20s. And what she says is setting healthy relationship boundaries, my hobbies and passions, my health. All of these are important things that will affect my retired lifestyle. And I absolutely agree. And in fact, the millennials are often talked about as the first generation that really has taken on this issue in younger adulthood, and not just focused on building and building and building. And I think part of that is because they watched our baby boomer generation put a lot of energy into building, and not always think about how we want to invest and experience the meaning of our lives. I want to mention that from the financial world, one of the things that's really interesting is the shift that people go through between acquiring and distributing or living off of what they've acquired. People who were lucky enough to acquire great wealth often are faced with quite a conundrum around, where am I going to put it that it matters? So you see, some of our most wealthy billionaires in the US who've made this commitment to get rid of their wealth while they're living. Well, that's a really interesting challenge, because then you have to really think about, where do I want to make a difference the most? Where do I think I can? How would I structure that? Well, all of us have built wealth of one kind or another: experience, time wealth, relationship wealth, and thinking about how am I going to invest that is really kind of interesting. So some other cool comments coming in. Let me catch up. Deanna Eastman shared, just had a friend who retired at 75, and this would have been really good for her to have gone through. She's had a hard time finding her focus, as she thrived by work and friends at work. Now it's just her and her husband. It's been a year, and she's finally starting to find her way. And I would say, oh my gosh, if she can do that in a year, kudos to her. We know that, for example, following the death of a spouse, it's at least a year before people begin to even get their feet on the ground, usually really 2 years. And then there is the exploration of, who am I going to become now in this new role? So I think people are often surprised that there is a process. Now, here's the good news. In all the research that I've tracked in 40 years in this field, there's very little data to suggest that people don't do well in retirement, with one exception. And that is when they're forced into retirement due to health problems. There's often a challenging adjustment. The people do really well. That doesn't mean there's not a really interesting adjustment period. There is, and it takes a while. Bethany says, living hard is as important as working hard. Absolutely. And Mary Grace Becker asks, should we think of retirement as a lifestyle of entertainment, a lifestyle of purpose? That's a great thought. Where does that take you if you think of it as a lifestyle? What does that add to the conversation for you? I don't think many of us would think of a lifestyle of entertainment alone as being adequate. We'd like to balance that. We want entertainment with contribution to society, or meaningful thought, or health or something else. And that's why I talk about all those different domains of life. But, you know, starting in our 20s, we have a lifestyle that has all those domains. And we've shuffled them. And now here we are again. Sandy Grivy says, I've spent the last decade excited that I'm nearing retirement from full-time work so I would have more time to do what I wanted to do. Then reality sets in with, what will I do with my unscheduled time? How do you focus? That's a golden question, isn't it? And I think for most people, there's a floundering period where you're just really not sure. And then you start to form some structures. I actually have heard the encouragement, and I think I buy into it, although I haven't yet experienced it. But the idea of not over prescribing your time in that first year after retirement, so you do flounder a little bit. What do I want to be doing at 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning or 11 o'clock on Wednesday if I'm not needing to be at my desk? What's worth doing? How many hours a day do I want to read? How much time do I want to spend doing puzzles? How do I want to reach out? Do I want to form a list of people that I think might really benefit from a phone call once in a while? Do I want to form a list of people that I want to get closer to? I mean, that's the whole purpose of the worksheets that I gave you, is to spend some time reflecting. But boy, it's a process, isn't it? Yeah. Other thoughts or comments that you wanted to share or address some of other people's comments? I'm guessing there's some people on here who have retired. And I'm curious, I would love to hear what you have to say about what's been the best thing for you. And I'm also curious what things were hard. Anyone want to share?
I would encourage, oh, go ahead, go
Raise
ahead.
your hand. Yeah.
I don't know, was it me that raised my hand?
Yes.
Yes.
This is Leanne. I think, and people that have been around me, also I watched, there's a challenge in needing to make mid-course corrections. And I'd be interested in any suggestions you have, because like you say, this pre-planning really has not been part of the traditional preparation. It's work, and then we're done. And
Yeah.
that leaves people sometimes just holding the empty basket.
That's a great point, Leanne. And so I have a really strong bias that any life phase we go into, any new thing we take on, we need to take it on as an experiment. My first effort at doing almost anything isn't the way I want to do it when I'm seasoned at doing it. I don't care if it's cooking or parenting or being a professor or being a therapist. It doesn't matter what it is. My first effort isn't my last. So I think it really behooves us to build into our approach to life the idea that we're experimenting, we're trying something, we're collecting data, we're getting feedback, and then we try something different based on the data that we collected. And that's a scientist language. I appreciate that's not everyone's language, but this concept that we should, I mean, really seriously, from the vantage point we're all at, what 18-year-old should ever know how life is going to go? I mean, what a silly expectation to expect 18-year-olds to even know what their career is going to be. I find that bizarre. I don't find it bizarre that people change majors multiple times in college, or that we have a lot of philosophers doing things that are not philosophy, not just because there aren't a lot of jobs in philosophy, because they just found other things they wanted to do. And we find a lot of people that go to med school and shift gears. So, of course, we're always, if we would build into our thinking that we're exploring life, and our first effort is not our last, and it's almost certain not to be our best. It's just our first. Now, how do we collect some data and pay attention to what's happening so that we come back to the question, what do I think about this? And it's really why in this presentation over the years, what I've tried to do is to sort of name some of the dimensions of life and invite you to think about what you care about, because I really do believe that 2 years after retirement, you care about something different than you thought you were going to. I mean, how many people buy the big RV and head out and then realize that just doesn't suit them at all? They miss settled community. Or other people that are in settled community and start feeling smothered by too much time with their spouse or partner, and they need space and separateness. Okay, good. You figured it out. Great, go create it. Just our first effort isn't our last. Joan Arnold just posted, I'm not retired, but a friend is, and she's been involved in so many new activities, such as being docent at the zoo, pickleball, and faith studies. I'm so proud of her. Well, I'm a little envious of her at this point because I don't have time to do all those things. And they sound wonderful. And I think it'll be fun to go explore that when I'm at that point. And I also think that when I face the blank page in my calendar, I'm going to go a little bit too. And I think that's part of the process of leaning into the uncertainty and exploring, finding out, what do I really think of pickleball? What do I really think of hiking 3 days a week instead of only on the weekend? What do I think about going to the gym in the middle of the day? I've never been able to do that. What a concept. What do I think about volunteering on a committee that I just wouldn't volunteer for because I don't have time for one more committee? I have too many imposed on me at work. So I don't know what I think about those things. You know, it's going to be fun if they keep inviting me to do this presentation as I walk through my own retirement here in the next few years. I face it with great humility. I really don't doubt I have any idea what I want to do. Even travel in concept seems wonderful, but I don't actually know how much I want to do. I don't know how much I can afford to do. I think I do, but I don't. And so it's all going to be an experiment where we come back to the question of, where are my relationships? Where's my health? Where's my meaning and purpose? Where's my cognitive activity? Where's my giving and community connection? Do I have it balanced? Does my wellness wheel roll, or is it wobbly? And I do say that for people who find themselves in trouble and they're sinking into a depression, or the anxiety is intolerable, it's a great time to go in and get some counseling or some therapy for a little bit. Probably won't take a long time. Just a few sessions that helps you kind of get your thoughts organized and send you back out into the world to try it another way. But if you're just floundering, I'd say flounder away. Enjoy it, embrace it. Let it be okay to not know how it's all going to look. That's all right. Other comments or thoughts, or it's also absolutely fine to disagree with me. That happens all the time to me in my life. So feel free.
Sara had made a comment earlier about, was there any people who are listening have gone through that retirement phase, that floundering phase, or that phase of retirement, now what, and stepped into that? Is there anyone in particular who would like to share what that was like for them? I know there's one person I see that I know personally here who is just having a ball with her retirement. And I think it's great. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Hey, Sara.
Hi, Gretchen.
Hi. I just wanted to tell you that just listening to you and, retirement is looming for me too. Who knows when, but it's looming. Just listening and hearing that, and your reassurance that it's not going to be perfect, and that you're going to just, need to find your way a little ways, but just go with it. Really has given me a lot of relief that just do it, find it, and enjoy it. It's not perfect. You'll find it. You'll get there.
Good. And if it's painful, come back to the question.
Hmm.
If you're spending more time with people than you want to, come back to the question, how do I want to balance things? If you're spending less time with people than you want to, come back to the question. If you're moving too much or you're moving too little, if you're a restless soul or if you're engaged and every minute matters, it's okay to keep coming back to the question. Joan, are you wanting to say something?
I kind of wanted to ask a question. I know of a man that's retired, and he's been so isolated. And you were talking about the men, how it's hard for them, the friendships and stuff. And what would a family member do to encourage that person to reach out to? I don't know how to.
It's a hard question, Joan. I think in our culture in particular, relationships tend to be mediated by the women. And many men come to adulthood, let alone later adulthood, really without good relationship building skills. They kind of always engage in parallel play. They sit side by side, they do a sport side by side, they watch TV side by side, instead of some more direct, and women talk each other's ears off and emote and do all kinds of stuff. Now, those are very, very broad generalizations. So, take it with a grain of salt. If you can think of an exception to that, I can think of 20. However, there is plenty of data. We actually have national data that show that men who are living alone are the most at risk for depression and suicide in our culture. And I think part of it is that they just don't have the skills sometimes or the strategies for connecting. So what do we do as families when we love someone who's in that spot? That's a lot trickier because it depends on the leverage we have with that person, of course. Honestly, I think it's valuable to have a conversation about it. Just to say, so-and-so, when I look at you, I see someone who's not nearly as happy as you were 10 years ago, when you were engaged in X, Y, and Z. That seemed to be a time in your life when you were really happy. And it's hard to watch you be less happy. Now, he may say, I am just as content. I'm just not as happy. It's okay with me. Okay. I mean, if you're not at risk to yourself or others, suicidal or homicidal, I can't make you get help. But sometimes just having the conversation opens the possibility to say, I just wonder if you'd like to connect with something in your community that would build back in some of that structure.
Yeah.
Thankfully, in this community, we have a lot of older men who drive for Silver Key, for example.
Oh, yeah.
I think there's a reason they're doing that. Driving is, they are competent, capable, and, and they're giving to others, and they have built-in social interaction, and they have structure 2 half days a week or 5 half days a week, whatever it is. I don't care what the structure is. If you show up at Care and Share and you stack groceries, that's great. Not everyone wants to socialize at work, but they need some structure. On the other hand, some people don't want to do volunteer work unless it has socialization built in.
Yeah.
So again, it's some experimentation to figure out where might I belong. And if you could help your friend or loved one, just think about what have been the things that mattered most to you in life. You used to really be active in a political party, or you used to be really active in the city outreach activities or city chorus. Maybe you can't do that, but maybe you could volunteer to be a docent, or you could volunteer to take your limited skill into a dementia unit. You don't have to be a Pavarotti to lead music at a dementia unit. Maybe you have something to offer in a setting you hadn't thought about. So I think you begin with a conversation. I see you as different from who you were. And I think I'm seeing you be less happy. Maybe you don't feel that way. But my wish for you is that you would be more connected because you looked happier.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? And then you start the conversation.
It's actually my ex-husband.
Ah,
And he lives with my son and family. I mean, it's a good relationship, but we were talking about him and maybe my son to have that discussion.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
good.
might be good. So thank you. That
Sure.
was good. And even for other people I know, that's a good thought. Thank you.
It is important that we, again, have humility about how different people want to age. Not everyone is an extrovert and wants to be out in the community. Some people are really content with a very small network and it really works for them. I think the difference is when we see people floundering around their mental health. They're highly anxious, they're agitated, or they're depressed. That's when I think we want to just maybe have a conversation, just invite the conversation. So Connie Miller is sharing, she says, at 71, dealing with how rapidly things keep changing is a challenge in and of itself. Activities I could do easily in my 60s are changing based on my health and aging process. Dealing with the fears and anxieties of what will happen with regards to my health as I go along presents a challenge. Living alone forces me to reach out to others and create social events even when I don't want to. Well, Connie, I suspect, I'm going to open my blind a little bit. It's getting dark in here. I suspect that many of us during COVID have had the experience of recognizing that our world has really shrunk. And I think with anyone who's experiencing health difficulties that limits their mobility or limits their energy will feel that shrinking of the world. So Carleen Ball calls it life space. And I think that it's a really valuable concept. When our life space starts to shrink, we have to be careful that we're balancing what we really can handle with enough stimulation so that our mental health stays intact. So it is the case that with, over 65, we start kind of really over 60, we start kind of accumulating chronic conditions that we're not going to get rid of. I don't like that at all. That this rotator cuff that gets irritated when I start to lift weights again, it's like really irritating to me that it just doesn't go away. I can stretch it, I can give it rest, but in fact, it's here probably to live with. My energy changes, word finding difficulties that are just normal parts of being 60s, 70s, 80s. They're with us. And as we have to start kind of paying attention to them, we're tasked with the challenge of not over attending to them and shrinking our world so much out of fear that they're going to get worse that we create a self-fulfilling prophecy. On the other hand, we can't just power through and not pay attention to changes in ourselves. So my approach is, of course, to try to optimize promoting my health, paying attention to, investing in my health, making sure I balance the stimulation in my life that I need to be healthy cognitively, spiritually, socially, emotionally, physically, and telling myself the truth about that. That if I'm being too sedentary, I'm being too sedentary. It's time to move. Get a Fitbit watch or something and put it on and make myself pay attention. Or on the other hand, acknowledging that there will be some changes and my world will shrink a little bit. And so how do I keep in my world what I need to thrive and not starve myself because my world got smaller? And that's where the COVID experience this year has been such a potent one for all of us, that we got a glimpse into life structured so differently. And we had to actively adapt, or else I mean, many of us gained some weight, many of us became more sedentary, many of us became a little bit more depressed. Some of us became way more centered and content because we finally had time alone and we quit running around so much. It brought possibilities and challenges. And again, what can we do except pay attention? Be compassionate, kind to ourselves about the changes that are real and about what we don't know, about the fact that it's an experiment and we're going to have to adapt. Any of us who've gone through walking the journey with a loved one who has gone through a serious illness and death, we've tried on in our mind, we've tried to, well, what will that be like for me? What do I think about that? How will I keep myself going? What's important to me? What scares me about that? What makes me antsy? Those are such great questions. And if you've never bought yourself a beautiful book at a bookstore, go buy yourself a blank book and start writing those questions down and just think about them. Pay attention to the people around you who seem to be addressing them in meaningful ways. What are they doing? How is it that some people adapt so well to very serious chronic conditions, to significant losses in income at retirement, or the cross-country move of all their family and now they're here alone? Some people do really well in the context of that, and others not so much. What's the difference? What are the principles you want to take away and try to apply to your own life? So Mark James says, retirement's a time to put yourself and what you want first. Most of us have spent many, many years taking care of others instead of putting ourselves first. It's okay to be a little selfish in retirement. I like that. I like that balance. And I think that there are people who become too selfish in retirement and they don't give enough to feel good about themselves. But I think the vast majority of us have been a little oversubscribed to giving and doing. And we need to kind of sit back and think about what feeds our soul. I happen to think giving is something that does feed many people's soul, but many of us have done too much and we haven't set boundaries. So I love your encouragement, Mark, to, now let's think about this. Let's balance things. And especially if you've given and given and given and not taken care of your health. Boy, is this a time to make a difference. You really can make a difference in your health by pausing and taking time to think about what you're putting into your body, how you fuel it, how you use it, how you give space for quiet and silence and mindfulness, and how you engage it in meaningful activity. Yeah. Great thoughts. Other key points you want to make? I'm so honored to have been with you. Thank you for this time. I hope, obviously what I'm hoping is that I've given you things to think about. I don't have the answers. That would be way beyond foolish of me. I do have awareness of what some of the research suggests and an encouragement to pay attention to how you want to balance things in your life. And most of all, just pay attention when you think about retirement to more than just money. Think about some of these other dimensions of your life. So thank you, Pamela and Bethany at INT. I appreciate very much the work that you do to put this on and get these opportunities to reflect on our futures out to us.
We really appreciate your being with us this evening and all of the sharings tonight, Sara. Is your contact information, is that out there on your PowerPoint or whatever? If for people
I don't think I did that. I can do that and send it back to you so that I'll give people my email. That's the easiest way to reach me. And
can you put it on the chat? Can you just put it in the chat?
I sure can.
That might be the best way to do it.
Yep, it's right there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So Again, there will be a survey coming out tomorrow morning for those of you who would like to participate. We would really appreciate your feedback. And of course, as an incentive, we have a gift card for you. You'll be put in the drawing for a gift card. And we have winners for the first 3. And we would share the names, but we don't have permission. So we won't do that this time, but next session, hopefully we can. So again, tell us what you want to know. Tell us what you want to know. And we will try to begin to incorporate more of those into our retirement series as we go forward into the fall and into next year. So again, Sara, thank you so much. Thank you so very much. It was awesome.